So now we've got Richard. I've seen Richard talk before, and it's always good. This is about processing, mapping, and empathy. Something like process mapping I have no idea about, and I'm very short on empathy, so hopefully I'll be a better person after this. I've got books and everything. So without further ado, I'll let Richard do the talk.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's just check everything works. Cool. All right, everyone hear me okay? Fab. We know what hackathon is now? Okay, good. My name's Rich. Welcome to my talk. This is on process mapping and empathy. So, to begin with, who am I? That's a photo of me doing dawn stalking things, which is a wild swimming group in Penarth, and that just happened to be a great photo. It was taken in the morning that I did this talk for Bristol about 2 weeks ago. So, if you want to find me on any social media, I'll generally be Jacksaw. I'm a cloud software engineer at a startup called Nightingale HQ, and I've been .NET enthusiast since last year, and a professional musician since, over the past decade or so. So, this talk is about using process mapping to build empathy to improve working environments. So, this is basically just a work in progress idea. This is not a conclusive academic or scholastic study. This is just some ideas that I think are good, and I'm kind of also shipping this to get people's feedback and kind of find out how it works. So much of what I'm going to be discussing is immensely personal because it's about the work that people do and the kind of pride they attribute to that. And I think it's very, very interesting how it works in different sectors. So this is not me trying to tell you exactly anything. It's me just expressing my opinion and welcoming yours in return. So, where did this idea come from? So, I did a process mapping talk for a EU conglomerate for women in manufacturing as part of EIT Strada, which was giving a presentation about process mapping. At the same time, I was at Umbraco London, giving a talk about my first 12 months of Umbraco and Azure and .NET. So realistically, both of these talks, well, I should have really explained, this middle talk, the one about the first 12 months, is very much about my own experiences the first year, and getting to understand how tech worked and how people within tech worked, and the kind of weird own goals and weird shooting in the foot that I felt some people went down in terms of just how they treated one another or how they communicated ideas, which typically tended to be suboptimal, or at least there are certainly, I think, my experience is being sat in a meeting, person A says, okay, so we're going to do blah, 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 and person B goes, sure, and you just sat there going there is absolutely no way person B has any idea of what they've actually been just asked to do. And we're going to discover this. And you can honestly start to just have some kind of timer going on the next 24 hours to find out exactly when their next email comes in. Or worse, 2 weeks later, when they deliver something entirely unrelated to what person A was even on about, but they were too shy to ask about. Little things like that. First part, process mapping. What is process mapping? Fundamentally, it's just, first of all, shout-outs to really obscurely massive monitors which cut off any text. So, love it. I feel we need more of this. Right. It also gives me justification for reading out my slides, the cardinal sin for any presentation. So, it's the creation of a visual representation of work. It is just a way that I can show you what I'm doing. It's not necessarily a flowchart specifically, it's just any representation. God knows I'll do a version that's about interpretive dance. Right, it's a communication exercise to define workflow, resources, and responsibilities. Who does what and for when? Who that impacts upon? All of these things. So it gives us a shared basis of understanding. It should be high-level, non-technical documentation, which should be understandable across the business. My dream is that process maps exist where every single department in a company at least has a fighting chance of understanding what the other departments do. There's a whole thing of being communicators about explaining complicated concepts within 30 seconds, and I think that's what process mapping done well could really help. So, just to quickly clarify, process maps can include flowcharts for kind of very generic things, but there are loads of different types. Here's just a few of them. Swim lane is when we've actually just split it up by the people involved. Value streams are far more about the business as a whole. We're talking about our time, resources, load time, etc. like that. And then we've got ideas like SIPOC, and then the opposite with your COPICE, which is going to be suppliers, inputs, processes, outputs, customer, which can be done backwards as well, so you go customers, outputs, process input suppliers. Again, just ways of representing the point of your business. So even across these examples, we've gone from like the swim lane, which is how we show what happens when somebody wants to apply for university, to like how does our manufacturing business work. The idea is they should entirely be agnostic towards the actual industry you're in, and there'll always be a particular process mapping style that works for you. Crucially, I'm not just talking about flowcharts, which somebody did point out the first time. There is also a difference between process mapping and process modeling, which I found out the day before I gave this talk the first time and haven't had a moment to update it. But the idea is that process mapping on the left is this, again, high level, subjective. It's a described thing. I am writing my definitions, my explanations, typically verb, noun, do thing. Meanwhile, process modeling is far more low level. That can be used in terms of your, in terms of code. We're thinking our models, we're thinking our methods, we're thinking our etc. as functions. So that's very low level. It's objective because it is correct. Like those are the names of those things. It is absolutely monitor type. There is no discussion around that. It's either right or wrong. But crucially, the reason I included that second diagram is because my name's in it. Because when I Googled for process modeling and found customer one being R. Jackson, there's no way I could not include that in my own presentation. A really interesting thing that I found about the other week, has anyone heard of Mermaid JS? Awesome, about the kind of number of people. So Mermaid JS is just process mapping as code, markdown to diagram parser. It's already auto-enabled in GitHub. Any README file, any markdown file you have automatically lets you do this, and I absolutely love this. So this is an example on the left of a markdown script that I wrote to actually explain to my CTO what I thought they were asking me to do, and that's the diagram that it automatically made from it. So the point is, I don't have to think in an aesthetic way, I can think in an entirely logical way, yet create an aesthetic outcome, which I think might be a very attractive notion to developers who just want to get on with stuff. This is a way that you can actually have even version control in flowcharts and stuff like that. If we're thinking like the kind of chaotic, putting like poster notes around the thing, imagine you can actually see who did change it and you could go back in time, the dream. So yeah, Mermaid JS, super, super awesome. And then I just want to finish off this section with a particular quote from the English mathematician George Box. All models are wrong, but some are useful. This is the idea that any representation will never be correct. That's just impossible in every single way, but that doesn't mean there's no point in doing them. We can still have value from like high-level diagram, even if I've forgotten, but on Wednesdays, then we've got like Kyle who takes out the bins. Like, yes, we could add that, but is that actually more valuable? So we can approach them in process mapping in terms of what is actually helpful for us. Empathy. Actually, I just really like this image, just for a second. It's just one of my favorite descriptions of empathy, quickly. So, what is empathy? Empathy is understanding what somebody else is going through. It is not fully, like, it's such an interesting characteristic. It's just so that you know what I'm going through, which is different, incidentally, to compassion, which is actually understanding, but then wanting to act upon it. So like there's a difference between just knowing what you're going through and having the drive to change it to you. And we're just going to start off from empathy, but ultimately compassion is kind of empathy plus in terms of our sort of goals of looking after one another as good, wonderful human beings, which we all are. So there are loads of different theories of empathy, and there are typically, one of my favourites is this kind of three-tiered version, where we have cognitive empathy, the I put myself in your shoes. We've got the emotive empathy, I feel with you, I understand your story, we're going through this together. And empathic action, I will stand with you without fixing it. Again, it's this really fascinating empathic part where it's not necessarily about, oh, you're doing this, right, so I'm going to sort this all out for you right away. And that can be a really overbearing thing for juniors to deal with, managers who just want stuff done. That kind of deprives the junior of the learning experience. And the other way around is a junior being way too practical. Oh, I think this is how it's going to go, and I think I can fix this. And then you come in on Monday to fire. I think process mapping is really useful to put yourself in other people's shoes. I also think it's kind of helpful for feeling with you, and it has certainly got value in terms of starting discussions. if we are able to actually identify the problem and clearly understand it without needing to fix it. That's a really good basis for conversation. Improving empathy with emotional intelligence. Kind of going off the back of some stuff Aaron was saying in terms of basic social skills and making friends and stuff. There are books that can be read. I've lent it to a friend, so I don't have anything, but a really nice starting point for empathy is to focus on another person's hows and whys. How did that person do that? Like, how, first of all, it's kind of nice to be aware of, but also, and then to try and go like, so why did they do that thing? If I think back to, like, from my perspective as CTO, if my junior goes off and does crazy things, how were they first of all able to do that? Like, how did they misunderstand it so vastly? And then why did they go about that? Especially in terms of then asking for information. Am I doing something in terms of not making myself open enough to questions? Or from the other perspective, the junior, have I not asked enough questions? Ask them if they want help. I'm such a big fan of this. I think this is so underrated, so yes. This will be my code garden. This will be my thing that I will say is great. Just asking if people want help before jumping in, really, really valuable. And offering suggestions, not answers, very much tying with that latter point as well to me. Process mapping, really valuable for understanding the person's hows and whys, because you are able to represent it. You are able to actually go into a diagram and go like, I think you did the following things. Or over, you can ask them, okay, but explain to me exactly what was going through. And again, a kind of aesthetic, visual medium can be quite a healthy way to do that. This is some really interesting stuff because we like to have stats and we like to have charts, and this is barely visible in terms of actually having any value for us, but I'm going to explain it anyway. So this is Ernst & Young did a survey called Empathy in Business. This is specifically from the leadership down kind of view, but I think there's also some interesting learnings that can come from it, and it's also super recent, 2023, that's not that far away. So, US workers feel that mutual empathy between leaders and employees leads to all of these good things. We're talking efficiency, job satisfaction, creativity, idea sharing, innovation, everything is better and everything is glorious, yay. But, way more interestingly, my company's efforts to be empathetic are dishonest has increasingly gone up. So actually, employees are more suspicious of artificial attempts to be empathetic over the past 2 years. 2 years is 46%, now it's 52%. My company doesn't follow through on the promises they make to employees. 42% goes up to 47%. There's increasingly, I would suggest, this focus on the importance of soft skills as a buzzword for driving efficiency and people going on empathy retreats and all of these kind of things. But unless a leader acts upon it, then your employees see through that. And I think there's just an interesting part. I don't want niceness to be perceived and to be confused with naivety, especially when I'm talking about this stuff. I think it's my next slide. Empathy is not the same as weakness. One of the most interesting bits of feedback I had after I gave this talk 2 weeks ago was somebody basically going, so if I'm nice, how do I get them to do any work? And I was like, in no way did I say that. I'm talking about understanding your employees or your co-workers' positions, working lives. That doesn't give leeway to just be walked over all the time. That's not what I'm getting at. It's just going to be valuable. I would suggest it was going to be valuable to everyone for just a little more understanding. Process mapping and empathy. Hey, the name of the talk. So, how can process mapping be used to support empathy? I've got 5 points here, 5 sections I should say. Communication and transparency, documenting and codifying, learning and onboarding, discussion and iteration, and patience and understanding. These are some of the areas which I think within the day-to-day work, process mapping ideas of just having some kind of high-level documentation that can be shared department to department can help. It can help us. I mean, communication is just the big one, 100%. One of my favourite books on the topic, Chris Laffer's Communication for Engineers. I was at EuroPython, I think, or it was PyCon, whatever, some kind of Python event. And I was chatting with this guy, he said, oh, you should check out this book. And I was like, oh, this is great, I love it, I love communication, I think it's really important, I think it's really, really good. It's like, great, I wrote it. So it's really nice when you can sell someone their own book. I feel that's a real good show of enthusiasm. Documentation codifying, if you've got a shared point of reference, a process map, you can all criticize it. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it. Or you can go, person A does it this way, and person A did the process map, which is in itself terrible, like everyone should or whatever. And then you can go, I didn't think about doing it that way. Have you considered X, Y, and Z? And it gives you a basis of discussion and, crucially, criticism and improvement. Again, the idea that criticism should always be a positive and should always be for value. Again, gets into areas such as like developer pride, which I've certainly not got enough information on how to solve that. Learning and onboarding, I think, is really, really valuable. Discussion, iteration, and patience and understanding. This last one, the more you understand that the reason I was late here is because I missed my bus and then got splashed by a puddle and then went and helped a kitten get down from a tree, everything like that, the more you understand my story, the more sympathy you will have for the fact that I was late. And I just feel the more open we are, the more transparent we are, the more patience we can have across businesses for, hey, why is department A always late? Oh, let's take a look at how they're, oh, do you see this area? This always gives them some grief. Maybe we can have a talk about how that could be improved. We're not going to directly improve it, that would be overstepping, but at least maybe if this is a pain point and we can acknowledge that and very clearly see it, we can chat about it. New employee, where's the documentation? Team lead, I am the documentation. The perennial terror of anyone who starts in a new job is what am I doing? And having scary people being very, very frustrated with you, asking the same questions over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I just feel that as a quick guide, a quick source of onboarding, process mapping in general can be incredibly valuable for a whole bunch of things. So, last couple of slides, process mapping communication. This is just an example of what's called a business. This is called a business, apparently, that was that sentence. A business process template. This is not a business. I will say that this is not a business. This is just a document, this is just shared around. There's just like formal ways that you can store these kind of process maps with codified things such as like purpose, entry criteria, inputs, outputs, definitions of success, etc. And again, it can kind of help to standardize these across a business. Fully aware that many businesses operate as many smaller businesses, but it is nice to have business glossaries in general. Codifies process for cross-business discussions. Process map for onboarding, it's everything I've just said. I think easily one of the most beneficial things that a company can do for its onboarding is some kind of really basic explanation in a really unthreatening way. I do straight up think the flowchart's really good for this, or if you're going between departments, swim lanes are really good. It's just a nice way to go about things without being too terrifying. And then there's the other side, that after a month, if you are the more senior person, you can ask the junior, make me a process map of what you've been doing. Like, show me how you think this works. Let's do it in a non-technical, you can do it with whatever degrees of freedom you want, however many post-it notes, etc. But as a learning exercise and a proof of understanding, I think just getting them to go, explain how all these APIs fit together. What happens in OAuth 2? What actually happens in OAuth 2? Does anyone know? Yeah. Right. Pain. Right, so gives basis for discussion research. I mean, I will be straight up, like, this week I solved a problem for myself in terms of not understanding something by making a flowchart. And like, it was so trivial, but it's just to go like, I think this is how it works. Can you please tell me if this is wrong? And then for them to go like, yeah, that's great. Like, that was so good. So it's nice that I actually used the things that I preached for a change, so that was encouraging. A couple of things super quickly. Process mapping for learning with Richard Feynman technique. Richard Feynman is the Nobel Prize-winning American physicist, not physician, like I said last time, which is, funnily enough, not the same word. Who knew? Richard Feynman, physicist, came up with this idea, and that's basically to learn anything, you pick the thing you want to learn, pick a topic about it, learn about it, try and read around it, and then try and explain it to someone. And then if they ask you questions you don't understand, you're like, I don't know, I'll get back to you about that. And you literally repeat. And because we're developers, the key thing is that at the end of it we can sell it as a Udemy course. I think that this explaining the concept, again, process mapping, or just any sort of visual representation, invaluable. And I think the ending part, where once you do understand the concept and you need to actually simplify it for all, to have a final process map which somebody can sign off and go, yes, this is the definitive guide for how this thing works. Really useful. Super quickly then, last bit. Process mapping for patients and understanding. Just understand blockers. It's so important. A blocker being just something which is stopping us from getting through our day. Or like, this is the daily stand-up that most developers have of every day. You meet up and you talk about what work you're going to do and what has been getting in your way. If you can point to a diagram and like stab it with a pen multiple times and go like, it's this thing again, that can also be really illuminating. It's also for for proving it from a business perspective if you need investment or like funding for particular tooling. Because you can say this step is what causes us issues, and we can start trying to actually allocate resource to fixing said problem. Requirement just not just within your own department, across the business. Again, I love transparency. I think the idea of just having across the business, everyone being able to understand. If I can look at your department's process and at least have a little idea of what you do, that would just be wonderful. And I just hope it was correct and accurate, and all these good things that documentation often is. So, in conclusion, confusion can be resolved by process maps. Process maps can provide clarity. Clarity leads to empathy. Empathy leads to happiness. Happiness leads to .NET, because I straight up haven't mentioned .NET this entire time, so I just figured I'd at least crowbar a .NET onto a Yoga. But point being, before we even got to that, is the idea that so much of this process mapping can just really help us through a lot of understanding, and .NET is pretty great. Tech is hard. Be excellent to each other. Thank you very much. Here is a process map about how Q&A works, and we're now going to engage upon this. So, the start in the Q&A, does the audience have any questions? Matt?
Do you want a sensible one or a non-sensible one?
Matt?
I've got a lot.
Please.
You mentioned earlier that it was good to see someone else's team have a process map to see how they work. Do you need a process map for another team, or just an interface with that team on how to reach your goal?
What a great question. And I think, honestly, that sort of depth is going to go so dependent from business to business. Like how that works, how you're going to interact, even on a technical level about those interfaces. And we can talk, that's definitely from the more coding perspective of really understanding their entire framework, for want of a better word. Yeah, great question. I don't have a good answer for that, but I just, in general, because I mean, loads of questions are, do you think it's better to do X or Y? And my answer is try. It'll be different for every single person. And again, I'm in no way attesting to, frankly, know anything, but more importantly, know anything about your specific business. And it's going to be different. But I think if you have the capacity to do that in a far more rigid, interface-driven manner, sounds really good to me, honestly. So, another question for someone who isn't Matt, and then we'll... okay, cool, right. My friend?
You talked a little bit about process modelling being more about the kind of structures of things. I'm quite a big fan of mind maps, mind mapping, which seems to sort of align more with that. Do you think that mind mapping, whilst it's not truly process mapping, can help with understanding empathy as well?
I mean, basically, I'm not really arguing that anything isn't process mapping if it's a way of explaining to someone else what you're doing. So for mind mapping, typically I'd associate that more with the initial planning of something. So I'd be interested to see how you use it for a process which already does exist. I'm just going to use the white flag of vicious surrender and go it really depends upon what is useful for you. Because the ultimate goal is value. The ultimate goal is that you have some kind of document, some kind of thing which other people can look at to understand. So yeah, mind maps are really good for that, again, especially for drawing and getting your own understanding of how it goes. But that might not resonate for someone else, so it's a case of talking to them as well and finding out across even the team what works for them. Good question. I don't feel I've answered it in any way, but I feel at least I've said words in response. Matt?
Can you legally stab a colleague in the face with a pen if they're the blocker?
Again, you're going to have to take that up with your HR department, because while it may or may not be legal or illegal, the benefits of it need to be weighed. You also may need to just in general check. Oh, we have an immediate follow-up.
It has to be a Sharpie.
It has to be a Sharpie. Are we going to negotiate on the stabbing implements for this?
I need some Sharpie sponsorship for that.
If we can get, just don't tell them why. There are a couple of questions behind me. They were, yeah.
So I'm a designer, and
Hi.
we empathize a lot. And we have this task flows, empathy mapping, and what you showed us looks like a business model canvas. So if you heard of this deliverable, is it similar to process mapping? Because I'm getting confused now. You know, like too many diagrams for me.
I think, no, that's completely fair. Right, so the way I'm going to answer it is by entirely covering every single thing that I've said, by saying a process map is just something which helps you explain something to someone else. And there are loads of different ways that will be of value to that. You're absolutely right. One of the diagrams I showed was the business process flow. Yeah, and what you're describing again, if it helps other people to understand the business or a process, then that is, in my mind, a process map. That is a way to explain you going from point A to point B across a business in some sort of way. Actual project managers would severely disagree, but that's my current taking on it. But I'd be really interested to see other examples. I want to see diagrams which I think would fit my definitions, but which I wouldn't call a process map. I want to be proven wrong for this, so I'm really interested by those kind of suggestions, so thank you.
Yeah.
For yourself.
Where, for you, is the balance between having codified process, rough standard operating procedure, and being able to respond to change
Yes.
as it evolves? Because people do not follow process, let's be real.
Yeah.
With chaos.
Yeah.
Where for you is the balance between two?
Yeah, so a good friend Aaron here asked me literally this question when I did it 2 weeks ago, about innovation. Right, the idea that documentation is anti-innovation. It's actually why I like more fast-flowing things like the Mermaid JS integration, where we actually have it being part of the code base. Ultimately, I do feel, oh god, and then when we brought this up, we bring up books like Extreme Program, which are all documentation rubbish because it doesn't give you intrinsic value, so there's no point in us doing this kind of stuff. And I think the only my particular bias is as a new starter, is as somebody who's hit the ground running. And I think attitude, so for example, a good friend of mine, Callum, he says about, the best documentation is the code base. The idea that if you want to know how something works, look at the code. And I agree to a point. I just think that across the business, that's not necessarily possible, because we're talking multiple different code stacks across anything. And also for just juniors, ASP.NET Core is incredibly overbearing in terms of how many different files, why is there this package manifest and why does nothing work anyway? I mean, just in general, I'd really like to know why nothing works. But yes, so I think there is value in at least having high level is useful. The actual innovation and the underlying tech needs to be able to breathe. And yes, what I'm saying could very easily be misconstrued as, this is now what we do, you do not step out of line, this is the way. And it's more or less, it should be treated as a living document for it. But yes, there is definitely a mid-ground for it, I absolutely accept that.
Last question?
Yeah.
No one else?
I did a bit of a boring one, but so working in a fairly small team game studio, we've got a bit of a lack of UI designer at the moment. So quite often, a lot of work which I believe the artist should do, the lead artist, the design of UI ends up kind of getting shifted onto me. I fill in the gaps in certain things. And looking at all of these process maps here, I'm like, this would be brilliant to be able to point to something and be like, actually, this is your side of the process. So how would you suggest that I suggest to my directors that we implement one of these? We work remotely, so face stabbing isn't an option.
Can you hire someone? Deliver stab? No? Alright, whatever. Yeah, swim lane. Swim lane is super good in terms of demarcating who does what. And also, I would also kind of say job specifications. I would also, like, jokingly say, if you're looking for UI designers, I know a really good tech recruitment firm who is, like, 2 of them are sat to my left. But yeah, no, I think, so what you're saying, you know, the bleed of responsibilities, especially in smaller companies when everyone does everything, God help the games industry in general, but in that particular area especially. Yeah, you need, I mean, this is clearly defined what you are and are not prepared to do. How I suggest that you talk about that is to say, I do not think I should be doing this, I think this should fit to the artist. To which the artist will go, well, I don't think it should be, and I think it should be somebody else. And that's when the Sharpie stabbing can begin. Okay, that's when you actually have to talk reasonably about the fact that here is my workload, and here is your workload, and let us compare and contrast. And then it might just be the case that if you really can't agree, then to hire someone like me straight up. But I mean, that's a totally blasé response to how do we sort a problem? Just bring more people in. So I don't really like consultants. Consultants, yeah. Be open about. I mean, like again, the only way is really through communication, especially if it's becoming a drain on you specifically as the person who's got to take up that slack. You just got to be open about that it's problematic. And there are many different ways of going about it. And I would probably talk to an HR specialist. Like, if it gets to a point of, like, seriously, if it gets to a point of it actually being problematic, talk to somebody who is really in that world. Yeah, that would be my, again, ask someone else kind of deflection of any sort of facts. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.